So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, and the scripture used then is from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation is from the original manuscripts of the prophets of Yahweh, indicating for us then the understanding of the time of the end, as per then the scriptures and then the prophecies of Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, where then the great prophet stated, and the cities laid waste for many centuries. People are beginning to understanding then what it means, the cities. It's not merely a fact of any city around the area of Jerusalem. When Yeshayahu was explaining, he was in a realm of heaven, and the focus from heaven in any given point, understanding in spirit, it is always related with tabernacle or tabernacles. So rather, if you read then Zechariah, or if you read Yeshayahu, or if you read then any of the prophets, you find always the core understanding of the prophecy, the tabernacle, or then later became the temple, as per the teachings of the tabernacle in the desert. So then let's evaluate what Yochanan, then the stepbrother of the Messiah, taught and what he experienced, as we read then Yochanan, and he said then in the start, or then when the scripture started, or then when the Torah started, he is explaining of the tabernacle. The only reason why Yochanan said, and at the end of this understanding of the completion of the Torah, until he started then recording. He was explaining up to the point when he started, the Torah was completed until then. He evaluated as the tabernacle. The tabernacle is alive, or Torah, instructions, and the instructor of the Torah came in person, in the form of the Son, to take the place of his Father, and then continuing the tabernacling. Thus then the Word became flesh. The Torah, the instructions became flesh, and obviously inhabited or sukkahd, or then tabernacled amongst his people. So then when we read Yochanan, then we have an idea what he's talking about. He's speaking of the focus of the tabernacle. The tabernacle first came from Yahweh when he was in the desert. Then the Word became flesh, continue on the tabernacle. So then, based upon these, there is no way for pagans to try to use themselves as some sort of enlightened people. They are so great, they were given then a privilege of exercising the spirit of Yahweh, or Elohim. Elohim is plural of spirit, in form of functions, where then they were never trained, they never did understand the oracles, yet they were speaking of themselves as granted with salvation outside of the Holy Tabernacles. Absolutely insanity and lunacy. We find then Shaliach Shaul, known as Paul, he did not go to the Gentiles. The proper translation of the original Torah, or then the spring feast revelation via the acts of the Shilishim, or acts of Ruach HaKodesh in the set apart, meant Shaliach Shaul, or Paul, went into the Gentile world. He went out from the Jerusalem's focus of the tabernacle, or the temple. He went out of the temple understanding of the Torah, tabernacling amongst his people. He went out of this scenario into the Gentile world. because he's explaining from a seclusion viewpoint. Gentiles and pagans, they do not have a seclusion understanding. Seclusion means focusing constantly upon the tabernacle, understanding the intricacies and the secrets of the tabernacles. Gentiles, they do not have this understanding. They were born outside of seclusion, and they don't have the understanding. That's why then their minds are then as seared with a hot iron, because this is what Shaliach Shaul or Paul mentioned regarding pagans trying to understand tabernacling. They were born during the time of deceit. The adults are mostly maximum of 3 years old. This is what the adults are in the scripture. More than a half of the world of the adults in the scripture, they are only, if they have studied ever since 2009 or 7009, they are 3 years old. How can they understand the intricacies of the Torah and its secrets if they are only 36 months old? They have to be taken by the hand in terms of understanding the tabernacles. So then you find Yochanan explaining, then when the Torah became flesh. And then you find the same Yochanan explaining Gelah or revelation. It's the same Yochanan, known as John, but does not exist John because letter J came via the Germans in the 1600s. It was not part of the alphabet until then. Yochanan was his name per original manuscripts. As Paul or then Shaul said, renew your mind with the Torah, the living Torah. The Messiah became the living instructions. He completed the spring feast and prepared his people for the autumn feast. There is no pagan mixture in it, because it's from the viewpoint of seclusion. So then, these days where mostly the entire world is caught up in lies and invented doctrines, invented ministries, where you'll find thousands upon thousands of people manipulating for their own ways, then the scripture already provided understanding, stating then they would not endure sound doctrine. When they would receive the truth plain and direct, they would not believe it, because they can't understand how they were deceived for their entire lives. 20, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 years of teaching what they did not understand. They are explaining a Messiah outside of the Holy Tabernacles and does not exist. That's why many people, they give up going to church, for instance, because it makes no sense. And they kind of are on the fence, a bit on this side, a bit on the other side, and they don't know what to do precisely, but then they go to church, they don't like it, and obviously it's a lie. Then they start to study a bit the other side of the truth, but then when it comes the time of understanding, paying the price, they don't like either, so staying on the fence. The Messiah said if you are neither hot or cold, he would vomit it. So those people are rejected by the Messiah for sure. So then, the Messiah explains what it means of the living Torah, or then the Word became flesh. He's explaining of the Torah. So then, understanding from the viewpoint of Yochanan, he then obviously had also the viewpoint of a Levite, because he had taken into consideration the focus of then the tabernacle is regarding Levites and the work thereof. Later you find in Yochanan explaining Gelah or revelation, then you understand he was explaining those areas in enlightenment of the tabernacles. That's why you find 7 tabernacles, 7 holy cities in Asia Minor. And you can easily understand those cities were established by Shaul, known as Paul. because he was making a continuation of the work of Shaliach Shaul going into the Gentile world, saving his people. So then the first section of the Torah is completed, saving his people first. Yahweh came to save his people first, and then his people, when they would be obedient to the instructions, then they would establish the holy cities, and then they would save the Gentiles. So it has to be in order, and then we begin to understand tabernacling, because they are returning. And then explaining these intricacies of the Torah for the 3 years old person sometimes takes some time, takes some enduring, because not only people, they don't have the understanding, but then those who receive the titles from the world, then they hide behind their titles. Then the main excuse is, can you explain then Revelation? No, because it's so complicated, only God knows. God gave revelation in order to enlighten his people so they would know what's coming. Then they can't explain it. It shows that God is blind. And then if you try to explain from the enlightenment of the Torah, then they mock. It's a slander. That's what it means, devil. It's a slandering. It's mocking. It's a spirit of mocking. Yet themselves, when they are confronted with the scripture, they can't speak, because they understand they have evil. And they can't develop, as then the scriptures say, they study, but they can never attain what the scripture has to give. Therefore, they can't teach any further. But it is understandable that people, they have only 3 years of age, 36 months of understanding if they study from 2009. Because up to the point of 2009, then 1,000 years given to Nahashatan had ended, and then the scripture of the Torah then began its transition back to what it was. Re-establishment of the holy cities. And this is what we read when we understand then the Gospels. There is no, in fact, the word gospel. There is simply the completion of the spring feast. Most importantly, you have the first gospel. Metchiah was a Levite. That's why you read the first understanding of the spring feast from a Levite's viewpoint. And truly, what you should understand of the Gospels, or then the chronological understanding of the Messiah, is first Yochanan. Because Yochanan was with the Messiah during the time of the completion then of the section of the spring feast related with the Mount of Transfiguration. He was on Mount Gerizim, and he saw the Messiah visiting with Moshe and Eliyahu. Metchiah was not there, but he did understand from the viewpoint of the tabernacle. So then, the main understanding, how is then the conscience of these false teachers for more than 1,000 years when they begin to understand the true scripture? So then, Gelah, revelation. What can people explain of revelation? For many people it's so confusing because God made this way to confuse the devil. Sure, how are you going to explain the autumn feast? This was the meaning of revelation, the autumn feast. Because the Messiah had completed in the spring feast, and then he was up on the mountain Gerizim, and he then opened the seals. So when you read Gelah, the 5th chapter, worthy is the Lamb, he was taken from the title, he was tested on the desert, he began to function in the 7 spirits of Elohim. He delegated responsibilities, then he went up to the mountain, and he received then the approval from Moshe and Eliyahu. Then the 5th chapter of Gelah, or Revelation, was then exercised while he was on a mountain. Then you begin to link up the understanding of Yochanan as Torah, living Torah, or Torah becoming flesh. This is what then the whole understanding is. So then Hebrews 7:12 gives us then the understanding of the tabernacle, or tabernacling. There is Hebrews 7:12. But as there is a change in the priestly line, so also there is a change in instruction. The change in English gives you the understanding of replacement of rather than completion. That's why it's bad word in English. Because what Shaliach Shaul, known as Paul, was doing, then he went into the Gentile world to complete the first section of the salvation of the set apart first. Then they would gather together, forming holy cities, secluded, and then in turn save the Gentiles. But as there is a change in instructions, so there is also then the involvement of Levites in the new enlightenment of the Messiah being in a Holy of Holies. That's why you have Hebrews in the Scripture. And then you have to realize then at some point, Shaul, known as Paul, said that his people then, the set apart, would be then enlightened at the end, and then the blindness that were then covering them for so many centuries would be removed. So begin to understand, then they are returning to the holy services, some of them are, and then the blind area or the blindness of the people are going to be removed from them. So then, in this time of the enlightenment or the unveiling, or then his people return to the holy services, we find then Gelah, or Revelation, the 18th chapter, you find then the Messiah saying, "Come out of them, my people, that you are not going to be then destroyed with the others." That's the time that we are living at. Revelation, the 18th chapter, because there is no chronological order in Revelation. You have to understand the context. Sections of the 20th chapter, the 1,000 years given to the Messiah that he already had then completed, is already gone. The other 1,000 years ended in 2009. So then you begin to understand how far away people are from the true Scripture. And then the 18th chapter gives us then, "Come out of them, my people, and return to the holy services." This is what the Messiah is explaining. And then later, he explains then the starting of the autumn feast itself, because when the Messiah came out of the completion on the Mount Gerizim, he gave them, or the Samaritans known as the Gentiles, 2 days of his time, ending in 70:31, minus the reduction. Then we begin our quest in understanding the reduction of time from 70:31, because the Messiah then was placed on a pole in 50:32, and he spent time with the Samaritans roughly a year later, not but a year earlier. Later, if you understand 50:31 as the time he spent with them and placed on a pole a year later. But then 50:31, he spent time with the Samaritans and gave them 2 days. So when he was up in a mountain, he was up in a mountain in 50:31. That's the time that he was transfigured, because he was given in the title, "Then worthy is the Lamb," in the 5th chapter of Gelah. Then later he became the Redemptor. That's why in the 5th chapter you don't find the title of the Messiah as Redemptor. You find only the Holy, Worthy Lamb. But then for some people, they are born during the time of deceit, They don't have any interest in learning the scripture because the world has blinded them from the light. They prefer the world over than the word of Elohim. So then we obviously have to teach and show them what the Messiah truly is, an enlightenment of the Holy Tabernacles. So the people of the world, they don't perish when the shower of sulfur comes from heaven after he rescues his people. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.